Tonight on True Crime Talk. This week's case involves a young federal prosecutor working on a high-profile trial. This young man is working hard, probably burning the candle at both ends, when he gets a late-night phone call. He abruptly leaves his office near midnight, embarking on a late-night roundabout journey punctuated by mysterious transactions and unexplained time gaps. Then his body is found in Amish country. Someone or someones stabbed the young prosecutor 36 times. Yet no one was seen with him. His trip makes no sense, and his stab wounds raise even more questions. Jonathan Paul Luna was 38 years old when he was killed. This case has been called Baltimore's most high-profile and perplexing murder investigation. Now, in September of 2005, a documentary written and directed by Dan Cohen is being released to the world in the chance that it may further this investigation. The Midnight Ride of Jonathan Luna will be open in New York City at the Quad Cinema on Friday, September 12th. For more information, go to themidnightrideofjonathanluna.com. We have documentarian Dan Cohen joining us on True Crime Talk today. Very excited to have you on. You were nice enough to send me your documentary, The Midnight Ride of Jonathan Luna. And this is a very strange and bizarre case for a multitude of reasons. And hopefully we can talk about the case a little bit here with you, Dan, and talk about this documentary.
That sounds great, Nick, and thanks so much for having me on.
So tell us why you chose this case. There's no shortage of strange cases out there. I said this one is strange and bizarre, and it absolutely is, but there's no shortage of them out there. So what drew you and your team to this story, this true crime, still unsolved, unresolved story?
I lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania when his body was found, and the author of the book from which this movie takes off lived in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I took note of the case when it occurred and followed it as long as I could. And when I'd heard that the news was that he had maybe or probably killed himself, I tuned it out. A couple of years later, I read Bill Kiesling's very good book on the story, which is a wonderful piece of work and on which our movie is titled. I got very interested in it. That was just because I could see there was some troubling information. And that was way back in 2005.
As I said, you were kind enough to send me the documentary. I've watched it. It's fantastic. I think it's going to do quite well. And the thing that I like the most about it, Dan, is one, the way you chose to lay everything out was very smart, very brilliant, because this is a difficult case to discuss and to explain to people. But you laid it out in a way that was very easily digestible, very easily comprehensible. And I thought I knew the case very well going into this. As you may know, we covered it quite extensively years ago on my other show, True Crime Garage. But the way that you laid it out made me, I think it was more informative than I had expected. And two, it was a clear depiction of what really is just a long list of unclear events leading up to this young man's death.
That's right. I think it is clear, and that's why it took us 4 years. Nick, I am not a documentarian. I've worked in the field a little bit, but I'm basically a fiction film. I guess I'm a filmmaker, fiction filmmaker, and I also wrote a biography. And I started as a reporter. I don't think I would have taken on this story had I not lived there and found it infuriating. In addition to clarity, we brought clarity to what occurred after Jonathan Luna died.
Before we get into the thick of it, how can people view your film, The Midnight Ride of Jonathan Luna?
Well, right at this moment, we're on the verge of opening the movie in New York. And the reason we did that is not because we think the film is a big theatrical film. I don't, although I think it's, other people have said it's an important film. We did it basically to get the press to take notice, to review the film, and to move the story along, because this is not a done deal. There's a court case that will take place on November 24th to get Luna's autopsy released to the public. And the movie explains why the autopsy has not been released to the public.
Well, that is one thing that I found to be incredibly interesting about the film, is it does address some ways that this case or the investigation could be further advanced. And that's very important in this story. And I love the way that you opened up the film, because this just wasn't your average Joe, right? Jonathan Luna was an important man. He had an important job. And you open up the film by stating as such that while to most people who, I believe, when they first take a look at this case, this young man, Jonathan Luna, he's only, 38 years old at the time of
38.
his death.
Not a child, but certainly we would, in today's world, a young person, right?
Oh, I would love to be 38 again, Dan. I would.
Oh, you would both. We have that in common, Nick.
So Jonathan Luna, only 38 years old, he dies a mysterious death in December of 2003. Having reviewed this case many, many times, I firmly believe that this is a homicide that we're discussing. He was an assistant United States attorney in Baltimore, Maryland, and was found dead under mysterious circumstances, but had been stabbed 36 times. And you open up the film by pointing out that only 3 murders of federal prosecutors have taken place in the last 100 years, which is a very interesting statistic, because you would look at this job that he held and you would say this job, it can be very dangerous, life-threatening for many, many reasons.
But isn't usually, because when we call him an assistant U.S. attorney, it makes it seem like he's a junior partner in a firm, but it's not. That's not the case. He was a federal prosecutor. He was chosen when he applied for the job. 500 others had applied for it. It's a rarefied and highly coveted job, and he was groomed by another DA before his boss took over a couple of years into his job. And again, this is a job that usually after people do it, they'll get some very, very high-end job in either defense or prosecution, but usually in defense, because big defense attorneys like to hire people that understand the prosecution, the process of a district attorney, federal district attorney, not a local DA.
And he worked in that capacity for 4 years, is what
exactly. And right. So just a little bit of background on this kind of this whole situation. 3 federal attorneys in our history have been murdered. In one case, the guy ran into a robbery or something. It was and was killed. In the other case, and this case is in Washington State, they know who killed the guy, but they can't get their hands on him, or they have a person, they call it a person of interest. In Jonathan's case, there has not been any suspect identified at any time. And there's a reason for that. And I think the movie points to some of the reasons. There are probably a few reasons for that. why this hasn't taken place. I'll just give you one little kind of fact. This isn't in the movie. In the case of the state of Washington prosecutor, the reward is $1 million for information leading to the of the suspect. In Jonathan's case, it's $100,000, which I think is kind of interesting. It's not in the movie because I didn't know where we would go from there, and we had 90 minutes because I have to tell you the main objective of the movie any movie is to keep the audience interested throughout, and that was my objective in the editing process, because this could have been 2.5 hours.
Well, I think it's going to lead to a renewed public interest in this case.
I hope so. It'll have been worth the 4 years of aggravation if it does.
But, and as we had just discussed, he's an active prosecutor. He's openly, regularly prosecuting cases in court. He's a trial attorney, and he would be an easy target for, and he's prosecuting a lot of very dangerous people throughout the course of his 4 years, but more so, or some more that we are absolutely aware of around the time of his death. Do you want to talk anything about some of the people? He was involved in a big heroin dealer's case, the Stash House Records. There was really a lot going on with his job at the time of his death.
Let me stick back just for a second and give a little background to give some perspective. Jonathan, in his 4 years, tried 80 cases. Keep that number in your head. Many of those people were not violent. They were federal crimes. Remember that federal prosecutors don't prosecute a local murder, rapes and things of that nature. You know what they prosecute, and I'm sure your audience does too. They'll do bank robberies, conspiracy, interstate infractions of the law, things of that nature. So Jonathan had prosecuted. He'd sent a bunch of dealers to jail. But here's what's interesting about Jonathan. When he died, 1,000 people turned up at his funeral. And a lot of them were the families of people he'd sent to jail, because he had a reputation of looking after the families of some of the people that he prosecuted. He had good relations because he understood. He was black, grew up in the inner city in the South Bronx, dirt poor. He understood the problems of victims and perpetrators. So this was no ordinary attorney. This was no avenging angel. This was a guy who was deeply compassionate and highly educated and highly respected. And I'll throw this in just for the sake of provocation. I mentioned that he had prosecuted 80 cases over 4 years. 2 days after his body was found, his boss told the newspapers, and this is the federal DA over him, that his death had nothing to do with his work. And my question, and a question we address in the movie, is how did the Maryland Department of Justice, federal department, or how were they able to ascertain that this guy who prosecuted 80 cases was not killed by anybody who had anything to do with his job? And I'm sure you find that peculiar too.
Yes, obvious reasons would point to the job being responsible, or at least at the center of this. And what you do such a great job of pointing out, and of course it comes from the book by the same name, The Midnight Ride of Jonathan Luna, that this smells like a cover-up. And then you have the feds, any federal investigators, they're pointing every which way except for at his job. First they point to suicide. Then there's talk about his death has everything to do with Jonathan Luna's personal life and not his work life. And so let's kind of go back to where he was found. So Luna, for those that are unfamiliar with this case, this young man, 38 years old, wife, 2 kids, successful career, highly educated. He's found stabbed 36 times with his own pocket knife and then drowned in a creek next to his vehicle, which is in a location where nobody has any rhyme or reason as to why the vehicle would be found there, but it's found in rural Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where you're from. I've been out to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. My takeaway was this is kind of Amish country out there. Very rural.
It is. Let me backtrack a little bit just so people get the idea of the story. And I think the movie does a pretty good job of setting up the sequence of events. It's called the book and the movie are called The Midnight Ride of Jonathan Luna because at around midnight, he left his office. He'd worked late on a plea agreement that had not gone very well. And he was found 5 hours later, 100 miles from his office in a stream with his carotid artery severed and a number of other wounds, some of which were, well, we don't have the autopsy, so we don't know exactly where those wounds were, although the coroner did explain a lot of that to the papers. And the number of 36, we don't know if that's accurate. We know that he was stabbed at least 30 times. So the mystery begins there. The mystery begins as to why his car and he traveled 100 miles over through 4 states and ended up in the middle of nowhere, really. And even 20 years later, it's the middle of nowhere in Lancaster County. So take it from there, Nick. Have I given some clarity to the basic narrative?
Yeah, so he comes home from work that evening. He tells his wife he's got to go back to work. And this is the part of the story that we know is absolute fact, right? We can right. confirm that he went back to his office, and then late that night, so 11:38 p.m. is what the internet's telling me, that Jonathan Luna left the Baltimore courthouse, and he's driving northeasterly on Interstate 95, and he has an easy pass. But then this adds to some of the mystery, because at portions of this very long drive, the easy pass is not being utilized to continue the movements. There was, I believe, some tickets were issued, but the first strange stop is after midnight, just before 1 a.m., $200 was withdrawn from Luna's bank account from the ATM at the JFK Plaza Service Center. This is near Newark, Delaware. And I think it's very wise. And if people aren't picking up on this, we'll just go ahead and present it to them right now. I think it's very wise, the title of your film, The Midnight Ride of Jonathan Luna. I think it's very wise for Bill Kiesling to have titled his book The Midnight Ride of Jonathan Luna, because you review that ride, and we'll continue on with it a bit here, but we can't say that he was the driver of that vehicle.
No, it's really suspicious. What we did in the movie, we first, just to give the audience some perspective, as a filmmaker, I tried to do it like it was a thriller. That's how I tried to direct the movie or assemble a movie. And so it's in sequence, of course, edited. So it becomes, everything that's edited becomes fictional on some level. But we do recreate the last hours of his life with like a normal thriller, with actors, and in locations that approximate the actual locations. And it is all very bizarre. There are so many bizarre things. For example, the car left the turnpike for a certain, 18 miles or something, about 1:30 in the morning, and then got back on the turnpike about, I forget what it is, but it's exact in the movie. All the statistics are there. So all of these things add up to very peculiar picture, and such that when 3 months after he was found when the FBI, that was the much later, they said that he was a probable suicide, and that they found, oh, the whole thing with the knife is so ridiculous, but we'll go into that later about the knife and so forth. I don't want to confuse the issue because we're telling the story out of sequence. Hopefully, Nick, and you can confirm this, the movie is coherent in terms of storytelling.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And so carrying on with that, what's really interesting, as mysterious as this ride is, this midnight ride is, the interesting angle is we can confirm a lot of the movements of the vehicle because of tolls and debit card usage, withdrawing money from the ATM. So it would seem to me, if he was in fact murdered, as I believe he was, what would make the most sense is that somehow somebody intercepted him, engaged him, attacked him. Something happened between the time of leaving the courthouse at 11:38 and probably before going to that ATM at 12:57 a.m.
Oh, absolutely. I think the general thinking, of, now I'm gonna get outside the movie, okay?
Yep.
Just so your listeners know, what we tried, but Bill Kiesling and I wanted to do, and Bill was very helpful in this regard. We don't want anything in the movie that, unless we say it, that is speculation. We stick to, the old dragnet thing, just the facts, ma'am. Now, we do discuss possible things, but we're very clear that those things are speculative or things that might have happened. We don't go into that an awful lot. I think you'll agree. We pretty much stay with what we know and what people have told us, because the reason we were able to make the movie is 20 years later, people who wouldn't talk back in 2005 when we first started the investigation after Bill's book, we couldn't get anybody to talk to us about this thing. Subsequently, as of around 2020, people retired from justice, judges retired. They were able to say things they couldn't say way back when. So now let me backtrack into what we're talking about here. Jonathan, well, the things that were said after he was dead made it seem like he was a deeply troubled personality. And that we go into at length. Okay, if I confuse the issue, if I have, get me back on course, Nick.
So at 2:47 a.m., his vehicle crosses the Delaware River toll bridge to the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And then this next marker on our timeline here, I want you to give us some details about it, because this is a very, very intriguing marker on the night timeline. So at 3:20 a.m., Jonathan Luna's debit card was used to purchase gas at the Sunoco King of Prussia Service Plaza.
Which is a big one. You know
Yes.
that if you've been there. Yeah.
What are some of the details, and I know we're trying to stay away from speculation, but there was some information that hit on the local media level shortly after his death that might point or indicate that there was somebody traveling in tandem with this vehicle, or I think your film says that 2 tanks of gas were purchased.
And that it was in the newspapers. That appeared in the newspapers shortly after he died. I have to tell you that I think I researched to the tune of 200 newspaper articles on this, and some of them were just reprints. But yes, almost all the accounts state, and I believe it's on his credit card, that 2 tanks of gas were purchased. Now, I don't take that, because I haven't seen the debit card or the credit card receipt. I don't take that as the gospel, but that is what was reported. I don't know about that for absolute sure, but you can see it in several newspaper articles. And that information could have only come from law enforcement. In fact, most of the information about what happened after Jonathan's death comes from law enforcement. The problem is that very often what's reported along with the information are the words anonymous law enforcement authorities. And I don't think the reporter who did most of this research on this made that stuff up. So take it. It becomes confusing at some point, but take all those things and put them in like a menu and then try and reconcile them. It's quite difficult.
44 minutes later at 4:04 a.m., this 44 minutes after the stopping to purchase gas, Luna's car exited the turnpike. This is at the Reading
Lancaster.
Interchange. The toll ticket. So he turns in a toll ticket, or somebody does, and it has a spot of blood on it. Now, has it ever been determined if that's Jonathan's blood?
Because they don't want to. You understand that nobody that was the easiest thing in the world. However, it was early reported to the newspapers through the reporter at the Baltimore Sun, Gail Gibson, that 2 different types of blood were found in his car. Now, conceivably, his wife, young woman who had just, Jonathan had, I think, a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old child, or a year-old child, I believe. That was reported, that there were 2 types of DNA or other sorts of blood found in the car, and that there was a spot of blood on this turnpike ticket, which I don't know how many times you have been through the turnpikes, anywhere you've gone. Of the hundreds of times, because I used to do a lot of traveling, I don't ever remember getting any blood on a turnpike ticket.
Right.
When you're driving, you're usually not bleeding. So that it was never explained whose blood was on there. Now, again, the sad thing is whenever we talk about these things, and I've been in these discussions now for years and years, the story gets out of sync, and the person who I'm talking to always seizes on certain things. It's important, I think, for your audience to know is we pull this together. I mean, if there's one virtue that the movie has, other than hopefully being entertaining, we do this in an order so that it is not confusing. I'm sure some people listening are somewhat confused by all these details, but go ahead, take it from there.
The vehicle was later found at this well drilling company out on Dry Tavern Road, and this goes back to the court case that you had referenced when we first started talking, that it's very important to get this autopsy released because we have conflicting versions of the wounds and how he was killed right there. So
yeah,
we get blood that's smeared on the driver's side door. They find blood in the rear passenger seat or the floor of that.
Yeah, and I don't want to interrupt you, but it was not just blood. It was a pool of blood on the passenger side rear footwell, described as a pool. Now, it would have been, what your car carpet is like. This was a Honda, pretty new car. I think it was a year or 2 old. There was a reported to be a pool of blood. How did that blood get? How did that blood, if Jonathan was driving alone, get from the driver's side on the left to the passenger side on the right on the floor? Never explained.
Because the way that I understand it here, Dan, is that the theory, the suicide theory that came from the FBI on this case is that he was driving around and he was trying to make it look like he had been abducted, and that he was cutting himself with his own pocket knife, his own pen knife, and then had accidentally taken it too far. He parks the car, gets out, and then falls face first into the creek and drowns there.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is that, understand, the way the public heard this was over 3 months. They first heard from the DA that his death had nothing to do with his work, and then gradually over a period in the ensuing weeks, information was leaked that cast aspersions on his character, his personality, his work, and his marriage, none of which was ever verified. And the movie goes into great detail. And then the explanation tenured, and that's in the movie, a former executive director of the state police, or the police commissioner, I'm sorry, says that one theory is that Jonathan was trying to get sympathy for his situation. What that situation was, I'm not clear. And by making it look like he'd been abducted, then accidentally nicked his carotid artery. And I believe that's a direct quote from the police commissioner. I don't know. You and I both shave, at least occasionally. I cannot imagine how hard. I mean, I've nicked myself a lot, but I've never nicked my carotid artery. But I'll leave that up to some doctor to discuss.
Well, a public autopsy report would clear a lot of this up, because you talk to some people and they say, look, there were hesitation wounds that are suggestive of a suicide. And then those same wounds that some call hesitation wounds are also referred to as defensive wounds by other people. And this would be defensive wounds on his hands, which would be indicative that he was trying to fight someone off who was attempting to stab him.
We don't know. And it was very hard for anybody to determine at the moment that when they found his body, because what happened is when the cops found his body, state police, they knew that this guy meant something because they could see the license plate was registered to the Baltimore federal courthouse. So they knew right away. He was found with his ID badge around his neck. So, one of the theories that, he was meeting somebody for an affair. I don't know. Usually when you meet somebody to have sex, I would think you take your ID off. So some of this is categorically absurd. And we just don't know. And what's interesting is we really do know, because 3 generations of coroners in Lancaster County have said to the newspapers that this was a homicide. Yep. And that was in spite of the fact that the FBI visited the original coroner, Barry Walp, and said, would you please change your report to say that it was a suicide, not a homicide. And he threw them out of his office. So something fishy is going on here.
And I think you're right. I think the reward money, when you have 2 cases that are of, so I think the other case is Thomas Wales.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you have 2 unsolved homicides. And again, this one not being looked at or presented as a homicide in the Luna case by everybody. When you have these 2 unsolved cases of people who worked in the same capacity, and where one, the reward money is $1 million and this one $100,000. That is just one more line item that is suggestive that they don't want this solved, because they don't want us looking too hard and long at this case, because it very likely is a cover-up that probably has everything to do with his job.
Yes, I think you're on the right track. But let me explain why that is. Mm-hmm. Okay. In the case of Wales, and I might have that wrong, because honestly, I looked at that over and over and then just kind of forgot about it. That remains a federal investigation. When Jonathan's boss, 2 days after they found his body, told the public that this has nothing to do with his work, if it had nothing to do with his work as a federal employee and a highly placed federal official, if it had nothing to do with his work, then it would become a matter for the local state police. Okay? It changes the whole nature of the investigation, because really then the FBI should have nothing to do with it. It becomes a case for the state police. And the state police are not going to offer $1 million. That's probably not within their, I don't know how they figure out what to offer. But what Jonathan's boss, who's a major player in this story, and I won't get into that because you can see that in the movie, said, look, this is not his work. This is some local thing. Somebody met, or, some accident or something. Then it becomes a whole different sort of thing. And the federal authorities hands off, which is a really awful thing. And we go into that at length. I mean, you remember his people that work with him, his co-workers, other federal, another one in particular, the woman who tried cases with him as a federal prosecutor discusses this at length, how horrible it is, because the feds are saying, now it's not our problem. This guy got into something on his own, which is, how could they determine that after 2 days? Given that the man had prosecuted 80 cases and dealt with probably a hell of a lot more over 4 years that he didn't actually prosecute, that he worked with other people on. So,
from my understanding, forgive me because I'm not, never worked in that world, but I've reviewed a lot of true crime stories, and I've reviewed a lot of unsolved cases. And that workload of 80 cases in 4 years, from my understanding, is about double, right? Most of these men and women working in that capacity are trying about 10, maybe close to 15 cases a year. I mean, he's averaging, 20 cases a year in his time?
Some of them were drug dealers that were pretty simple. I don't know that that's an indication of anything. Other than the fact that when he started out, he was a novice as a federal prosecutor. And see, as they go up the ladder, they deal with more complicated, lengthy cases. And it's interesting you point that out, because in the story, we explain and we show how Jonathan wanted to get into more sophisticated, complicated, and long-ranging investigations. And this particular long-ranging investigation got him killed.
But what I do think it's suggestive of, Dan, is that he was good at his job, and where I believe it was his superior, his boss, that was kind of besmirching his good name to the state police.
Well, that's something that is better explained and better dramatized in the movie, because the whole genesis, and that's why we started from the very beginning explaining who he was, how he got where he was, and what got him into trouble. Yeah, he and his boss, Tom DiBaggio, did clash. Tom DiBaggio remember, this is a federal job. It's an appointed job by the president, actually, or the Department of Justice. This is a political job, being a DA. And this was a big office, 60 lawyers. This is a very important job. And we go into why he and Tom DiBaggio didn't get along. And actually, I think you would agree that we see in the trajectory of this story how this was the downfall of Tom DiBaggio's career.
Yep.
Very interesting.
And not to jump too far to the end here, but I want to leave plenty of meat on the bone, because it is such a good film, and you did as I said earlier, you did a brilliant job of the way you chose to lay it out, and I want people to go and see it. But before we wrap up here today, Dan, I want to make sure that we touch on two things, because these were some indicators to me that we have investigators talking out of both sides of their face, right? Where one saying it's suicide, one saying that his death had nothing to do with his work life and everything to do with his personal life. But then you also have, I found several articles when I did my research for True Crime Garage years ago. They mention, well, we're checking databases like CODIS and APHIS. Well, if you're checking databases like CODIS and APHIS, that is telling me, if you're telling the truth, that you have DNA evidence of a suspect, you have a fingerprint or fingerprints of a suspect.
Yeah. I don't know that because it's been kept from me, and there's been so much stuff that's been out there on this case because it's one of the great mysteries that I did not feel comfortable putting into the movie because there was no certainty. You know more about. See, you're a crime guy, and I'm not. I'm a storyteller, and I know a lot about this story because I was on it for so long. But my objective was to make a coherent story because the people that are I'll just say this, that are against Jonathan, didn't like Jonathan, that cast aspersions on his life and his career, and that's clear in the movie. Those people, I wanted to make it clear where they were coming from, and I wanted to make sure that I did not put in information that I was not absolutely sure of, so nobody could come back and discredit the movie and our work. Is that kind of clear?
Very clear. And one part, you being a storyteller, one of the great parts of this story and of your film, this was haunting. It's a powerful film when it sticks with you, when you can't just turn it off and leave it. This has traveled with me since viewing the film, and it's very haunting, where one of Jonathan Luna's colleagues had told him at some point that there are 3 types of evidence in cases that Luna would be working: the evidence that you know, the evidence that you don't know, and the evidence that you are unsure of.
And one of them or both of them can kill you.
Yep. That's a very, very haunting stuff. So, Dan, tell us again how people can go and see this film, and will it be in the living rooms and streaming at some point?
Yeah, well, that's the objective. We opened it here so we could get reviews and credibility. It's as simple as that. I'm sure you have a lot of viewers in New York, right, in the city?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So we're in the Quad Theater starting the September 12th, at least for a week. We'll be screening nightly, and it's a regular movie opening, and hopefully that leads to something that one of the streamers will pick it up. But we hope it's available to a lot of people, and we hope that just the way you picked up on it, that the New York press picks up on it, because after all, this is about a New Yorker. This guy was born in the South Bronx. He went to high school in Hell's Kitchen here, a special high school for gifted kids. He went to Fordham. He started at the Brooklyn Attorney's Office, the public defender, and the DA. And it is really a New York story in a lot of ways. And I really appreciate your helping us get the story out there. This is what makes the difference. And I know you got a lot of listeners.
The film is very good, and I'm sure the streaming services will be fighting over it very soon, and it will be in living rooms everywhere. And what I'm most excited about is we're keeping the story alive. There is an upcoming court date with this autopsy information, and I think the film is going to have a direct impact of a renewed interest in this case. We got to rally the troops. We got to get the public shouting and demanding answers and clarity here in this very mysterious case.
And Nick, you're a part of that. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this, because your listeners can make a difference. If people get angry about this, it just takes a bunch of letters, a federal investigation, just in many other similar cases. This is a federal matter, and there should be a team appointed to look into it. This is a highly placed federal official, and if you've seen the movie, and I won't go into it, but this guy was not. He was a man of integrity and great achievement, and he'd come from nothing and made an amazing career for himself. And by the way, married to a doctor. This was a very good family that fell hard.
If you love true crime, there is a whole bunch of it that is really good just waiting for you at wildbluepress.com. Some of the very best in true crime is available from the good folks over at Wild Blue Press. Books like Monster by Steve Jackson, The Delphi Murders by yours truly, Nic Edwards, The Garden State Parkway Murders by Christian Barth, and of course, Speaking Truth to Evil, The Myths and Facts Surrounding Today's Serial Killers by American profiler Phil Chalmers. That's wildbluepress.com for everything interesting in the world of true crime. Books, ebooks, and audio. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and follow True Crime Talk on your listening app, and support True Crime Talk by leaving a positive review so we can keep bringing to you more great true crime talk. Thanks for listening.